NATO war crimes and involvement. NATO, founded in 1949 by 12 countries, is at present the biggest geopolitical war machine of 32 member states. The scale of expansion contributed to international tension as Russia sees itself increasingly surrounded by US and NATO bases. The alliance calls itself a defensive alliance and claims to be based on the member countries' common values of individual liberty, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. In reality, NATO is far from this. NATO has a blood-soaked history of organizing or supporting coups, brutal colonial wars, and military interventions. Within the meaning of the Nuremberg Tribunal judgment in respect to German Second World War crimes, NATO deserves the label criminal organization. Since the 1990s, NATO forces have repeatedly committed severe war crimes and crimes against humanity. In 1999, without the consent of the UN Security Council, NATO bombarded Yugoslavia, violating Article 2 of the UN Charter. NATO performed serious war crimes, such as indiscriminate bombardment of civilian centers and the use of indiscriminate weapons, including depleted uranium and cluster bombs. The Yugoslavia War of Aggression was the prelude to a series of aggressions against Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and elsewhere, during which war crimes and crimes against humanity were committed without any punishment. The International Criminal Court, in the hands of the collective West, never investigated these crimes. The war in Ukraine, which NATO expansion did much to provoke, has led to substantially increased NATO activity in Europe. Since the beginning of the war, NATO allies have provided Ukraine with unprecedented levels of financing and arming support. This unwavering support confirms that weapons, not negotiations, are NATO's unshakable motto. The genocidal Israeli war in Gaza and the West Bank, causing worldwide outrage, has been silently accepted by NATO and its allies. This despite the fact that all states have the duty to impose a full arms embargo on Israel. This duty derives from decisions of the International Court of Justice from January and July 2024 that concluded Israel is plausibly carrying out genocidal actions in Gaza in violation of the Genocide Convention and that Israel is illegally occupying Palestine. The arms embargo duty has also been asserted by the UN Human Rights Council and various UN experts. Stopping the flow of arms, energy, food, and other key exports to Israel is meant to ensure the protection of the Palestine people. But NATO countries' arms trades in both directions continue, and Israel can count on diplomatic and military support from NATO countries and for its wars of terror. All this, alongside an increased presence in the Asia-Pacific region and across other parts of the world, increases the risk of conflicts and war. And finally, NATO is a nuclear-armed alliance. Added to nuclear bombs already stationed in the US and France, around 150 US B-61 nuclear bombs have been stationed in Europe, in Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Turkey for years, and now it seems that US nuclear weapons will be brought back to Britain. NATO maintains a nuclear planning group to discuss the launching of a war that would put all life on Earth at risk.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all today. My name is Liz Remiswal, Kia ora from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Women Peacemakers, Building a World of Peace and Justice. And this webinar is organised by the Global Women United for Peace Against NATO, GWUAN, and the International Women's Alliance. It's part of a two-part series to address NATO and other perpetrators of war during this time of escalated crisis and heightened tensions in the global situation. It's high time for peace, all peace-loving and justice-organised orientated people to take action against the rising fascism and put an end to this destruction caused by war, especially imperialist wars of aggression and intervention, using the false narrative to promote peace and security. My name is Liz Remerswal, and I'm happy to be your co-moderator today. I'm the Vice President of World Beyond War, and I'm also a member of the Pacific Peace Network. And I'd also like to pay tribute to all Indigenous people and the land on which we all stand, and the resources, the environment which we all share, and acknowledging the values that have sustained people for tens of thousands of years, values of community, respect for the land, and stewardship for future generations. Living practices that guide us and remind us that our actions today echo through time, impacting those who come after us, and drawing on the wisdom and traditions of people who have walked this land for thousands of years. We hope that as we share the land today, our sorrow for the cost of that sharing mean that we can hope we can move together in harmony, justice, and peace. And now I call on Donna. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you, Liz, and hello, everyone. My name is Donna Danina, and I will be the other co-moderator for today alongside Liz. I am the Secretary General of the International Women's Alliance. We are an alliance of grassroots women's organizations and institutions fighting for the liberation of women specifically and all exploited and oppressed people around the world. We have an exciting program for you, but before we get started, we'd like to go over some brief reminders on our rules of conduct. This webinar will be conducted primarily in English, so please do utilize the chat to introduce yourselves, the organization you are with, and if it's applicable, and also where in the world you are joining us from. You may also use the chat to express your views, ask questions, or react and respond to the information being shared. And also please be respectful to our speakers and presenters, as all of our speakers have taken time to put thought into the information being shared, some even working through some grueling conditions just to be with us today. Finally, take care of any needs you may have throughout the program, be it getting a glass of water or some tea, using the restroom when you need to, or just taking a time out to reground.
This webinar would not have been possible without the support of our sponsoring organisations, and we would like to take this time to acknowledge them. Here you see the logos of all our wonderful sponsors from around the world. So on behalf of GWUAN and Iwa, we thank each and every one of you from the bottom of our hearts.
So let's begin. Before we introduce our first speaker, we wanted to share a brief background on how Iwa and GWUAN came together to work in partnership on this event. Last year, GWUAN and other supporting organizations held a successful face-to-face event during the NATO summit in June in Den Haag, Netherlands, where we confronted NATO and held an event called All Over the World, Women Say No to NATO. It was a big success, and at the same time, we also released a photo display, which was the video that was playing earlier just before the start of this program, which featured more than 200 women from around the world denouncing NATO and its warmongering schemes. This photo collage was then circulated to various parliamentarians in an effort to have the voices of these women heard in denouncing the various war crimes, to oppose NATO, and to elicit a response as policymakers and leaders in their own countries. Parliamentarians have a special role and privilege from their positions of power, but without the voices and demands coming from the people, decisions made by those in power are easily co-opted and often turned against the people. Therefore, it is imperative that the demands of the people come from the people, and MPs and other people with a political platform must represent the voices of the oppressed, the most impacted. And it's in this spirit we have joined our efforts with other organizations to hold this webinar today, with the voices of the grassroots, particularly from among women, to engage in a dialogue alongside progressive parliamentarians who have used their platform to raise the demands of the people. Today, the focus of this webinar will center on Asia, West Asia, and the Pacific. We have part 2 of this webinar, which will be held on May 23, and will focus on grassroots speakers and parliamentarians from Europe, Africa, and the Americas. I'd like to then go on and read the objectives. Number 1 is to support the call for peace and social justice by creating spaces for women from the grassroots and peace movements to voice their concerns on the increased wars of aggression happening in the world. Number 2 is to foster productive dialogue and discussion between parliamentarians, women peace builders, anti-war activists, women advocates, feminist movements, and human rights defenders to develop a deeper understanding of the roots of conflict and war and the disproportionate impacts of war in causing gender-based violence. And finally, develop regional strategies and plans that directly address the concerns of women and their communities who are most impacted by war and conflict. We hope that by the end of this webinar, we can continue to work together and forge ahead in unity and in solidarity to put an end to these wars and all entities that are complicit. So with that, I'll pass it back to Liz to introduce our keynote speaker.
That important background. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Anuradha Chinoy, who is coming from India, and she will give a brief overview of the current geopolitical situation in the world. Dr. Chinoy is a formal collaborator of IPB International Peace Bureau and has been elected as a board member in 2025. She is an academic committed to peace and a writer who seeks to unravel geopolitics and show peace-related alternatives. Anuradha is currently an adjunct professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs, Jindal Global University in India. She is also an honorary associate fellow at the Transnational Institute and part of the Asia-Europe People's Forum. She's a former professor and dean at the School of International Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University and actively contributes to peace and women's movements. Her teaching and writing center on international relations, common security, Russian and Central Asian studies, security issues, human security, militarization, foreign policy, peace and conflict studies, and gender issues. Thank you so much, Anu. Welcome.
Thank you. Friends at GWUAN, Liz, Donna, and others, I'm deeply honored to be here and give an overview on how I see the international system currently. So friends, what we witness in real time on our screens since 2023 is an ongoing genocide on the Palestinian people by Israel. In this last 1 year, the US has bombed 9 countries, and the US and Israel initiated an illegal war of choice on Iran and Lebanon, which is now in phase 2 as a temporary ceasefire stands. Now we know the numbers killed and injured in this particular war on Iran and Lebanon run into thousands, and in the last since 2023, they're running into hundreds of thousands. In Iran and Lebanon, the first attack killed Iran's supreme leader, 29 government high officials, 160 schoolgirls, followed by attacks on infrastructure, on schools, healthcare systems, universities, libraries, signifying a politics of erasure, attacks on memory, attacks on civilization, and then simultaneous attacks on Lebanon. Now, the US's ostensible reason for this war on Iran included regime change, destruction of Iran's missile production, seizing highly enriched uranium, even though the President Donald Trump claimed to have destroyed this during the June 2025 bombing on Iran in the midst of negotiations. So the real objectives of this war by the US is to forge their primacy, protect the petrodollar hegemony, control oil routes and shipping lanes through the critical choke points of the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea that go to Asia, especially to China, the US's main adversary. The US also seeks to continue providing security for their twin pillars in this region, Israel, the executioner of the West, and the oil-rich Gulf states, and also to strengthen the American military-industrial technological complex. Now, as Iran retaliated, the US military lost personnel and aircraft. 17 US bases across the region were damaged. They spent over $1 billion a day in this 40-day war. Other Gulf cooperation countries, their infrastructure was badly hit. The US has not been able to provide security for its Gulf allies at its time of need. Its European allies have not supported this war, and NATO appears fractured. Oil and commodity prices spiked globally. US citizens have largely opposed this war. Russia and China and many countries, including India, are trading oil in the yuan. So, US objectives have not been met as the war exposed the limits of US power. Now, for Israel, this war is a continuation of the ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the West Bank. It is an extension of the Greater Israel Project, whereby it first occupied South Lebanon in 1982. And here, Hezbollah, a non-state actors, expelled Israel in the year 2000, but this desire of Israel remains. So Israel's objective has been to destabilize Iran, that has been a roadblock to these policies, and to reroute oil pipelines to go through Israel. Again, even after this war and years of attack, Israel's objectives remain unmet, and so they want to continue the war but need US support. For Iran, this war is about regime survival, which they have achieved so far at a heavy cost of lives and infrastructure destruction. Its people, including women who had protested, for various grievances, are mobilized for the regime, and its central core, the IRGC, that is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is intact. The ceasefire in Lebanon, which was put in place 2 days ago, is linked with Iran's proposal for ceasefire and the Iranian 10-point proposal for negotiations, which includes a non-aggression pact, Iranian control over the Straits of Hormuz along with Oman, a yuan-denominated toll tax, acceptance of minimum enrichment as earlier promised by the JCPOA, lifting of sanctions, compensation, withdrawal of US forces from the region. So all this is on the negotiating table. Meanwhile, with economic disruptions because of this war, the UNDP says this conflict threatens to push world poverty figures from 1.9 million to 8.8 million, with South Asia amongst those regions which are badly affected. And of course, Iran's Human Development Index would decline by 1.5 years of progress. So what do we have? On one side is the hegemonic power of the US and its regional proxy, the now empowered Israel, and their actions are a pattern. And what are these actions? Use of excessive force, negotiations as a ruse to restart wars, commit war crimes, remain unaccountable, violate international law, bypass international institutions, conventions, and norms, use their powerful media to demonize their adversaries, call them terrorists, legitimize their killing, use sanctions to hurt people and weaken regimes. In the case of Iran, 47 years of sanctions, use brute force, threaten apocalypse, use sexualized expletives, delegitimize opposition, and even see peace and opposition to war as weak. For example, even when articulated by the Pope. So the opposing side is the defender, resisting empire with all its asymmetries and shortcomings, even as it's internally militarized, as these states tend to be. So in this war, Iran is defending its sovereignty, its strategic autonomy, its choice of development, its path of equality as an independent state. Iran seeks empowerment through resistance by leveraging and negotiating everything it has for survival. It has showed loyalty and care for the Lebanese resistance. Now, these concepts which Iran has in its moral declaratory framework and its behavior vis-a-vis its allies and the hegemon, these concepts like autonomy, empowerment, equality, resistance are part of feminist ontology used in their everyday struggles. Though, of course, Iran will have to address these in their conversations with women after the war. Now, feminists, I would argue, are divided on this war. There are women who are part of power structures, like in NATO, spokespersons for Trump, who support policies that hurt other women and children. And then there are critical feminists, women for peace, women in grassroots, who are arguing and asking for a politics of rupture, a politics that supports peace and opposes militarization, stands against a system based on war, extraction, and exploitation. So, friends, empires do not decline with declarations, but with resistance. What we are witnessing is that in this war, the hegemon, with reference to the hegemon, the threats are not working. Their legitimacy is undermined. Their allies are turning away. Iran and its axis of resistance has engineered the reversal of empire, exposed the weakness and fallibilities of its ally Israel. Now, and forced them on the negotiating table and at least a 2-week truce. US and Israel, of course, remain great military powers with capacity to destroy, but they no longer determine outcomes. There is a structural and visible crack in the empire. And on the other side is this developing multipolarity, the BRICS, and so on and so forth. So finally, our role in the women's movement for peace, with intersectionality, with justice, liberation, freedom, resistance, is to form a united front, against the binaries that produce war. Have a conversation on developing common security, developing a united front with all those who oppose war and its injustices. As Rosa Luxemburg had argued, a united front that would be organic and democratic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anu, for all of your wisdom and insight into describing these great problems that we're facing at the moment. That was absolutely wonderful. We really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you, Liz, and thank you again, Anu. That was very, very informative, very succinct, and very helpful analysis. We will have a chance to have folks ask questions, including Dr. Chenoy. So if you do have questions, please make sure you put them in the chat. I'm now honored to present our panel of speakers, Voices of Women from the Grassroots. Our first speaker, Sahar, will represent the people and women in Iran, a very important and relevant issue, of course, because of the current war being waged on the people there and also in southern Lebanon. an unjust and illegal war by the Zionist entity Israel and the United States. Our next speaker, Nalin, comes to us from Munich, however, represents the voices of women from the Kurdish women's movement and the current situation in northeast Syria as they fight for their autonomy and independence of Rojava. Our final speaker, Maria Hernandez, comes to us from GWUAN, representing the people of the Mariana Islands in the Pacific, which, by the way, they have just been experiencing a super typhoon. So very dangerous situation for them as we speak. But it is an important regional focus due to the intensifying militarization and war exercises by the US in the region. Back to you, Liz.
Yes, and our thoughts are very much with the people in the Marianas coping with that super typhoon. So we will first listen to all of the presentations from our speakers, and then we will hear reactions and analysis from our parliamentarians. After all speakers have presented, we will then have a Q&A discussion where you can ask your questions. If you like what you hear, please don't hesitate to share your reactions or emojis in the chat. Donna.
So, sorry about that. For our first speaker, we have Sahar, who is a journalist, an English translator, and a researcher. Unfortunately, because of the ongoing war, Sahar is not able to join us online. There is currently a lack of internet that she has access to and a media blackout, particularly in the city of Tehran, where she's based. But she did provide written testimony about her real life experience and what is happening on the ground in Tehran. And I will go ahead and share that with all of you today. It's entitled Personal Experience of Shock, News Blackout, and Psychological Pressure. On the morning of Saturday, February 28th, the day of the attack on the leader's residence took place. I was at home getting ready for work. My shift was in the afternoon. Suddenly, news of the attack broke. I was overwhelmed with shock. I barely remember anything from the first few hours. The only thing I did was call my colleagues to find out what had happened. Everything felt like a dream or an unreal nightmare. A few hours later, the internet was completely cut. No accurate information was available. A strange news blackout had set in. By late evening, sporadic reports emerged, and finally, news came that Ayatollah Khamenei had been killed. Society was plunged into complete shock. In those early moments, I witnessed a scene that has stayed with me. Our downstairs neighbor, without even changing his clothes, rushed to his young daughter's elementary school. Later, he told me that when he got there, all the children were crying. No one knew what had happened, but the sound of the blast and the atmosphere of fear had terrified the children. Around the same time, news arrived that children at a school in Minab had been killed in the very first hours of the war. Children whose parents had sent them to school that morning like any other day, unaware of what was unfolding. This news was devastating for many families. When my mother heard it, she said, "The parents who sent their children off to school as usual that morning never imagined it would happen the last time." A few days later, our office building was also damaged by a blast wave. The building was evacuated and everyone was shifted to remote work. Many of my colleagues left Tehran for smaller towns. Our workplace was moved to a small temporary location with only a limited number of staff present. Others were scattered across different parts of Tehran. The complete internet blackout was one of the harshest aspects of those 40 days. Communication between families, colleagues, and the community was also severed. Many images, narratives, and experiences went unrecorded or were never published. Even now, we do not have a full understanding of what really happened. Many people remain unaware of the details. During this time, Tehran was the main target of the attacks. Even now, Tehran remains quieter than ever. As a journalist, only some reporters had access to the international internet, and that was coordinated through media managers. Many journalists could not work. Some were laid off. Some fell ill, and others left the country. I was also unable to conduct many of the interviews I had planned due to the lack of a proper workspace, loss of contact with colleagues, or limited internet. I could not reach medical staff, Red Crescent workers, or other key sources. After 40 days of continuous attacks, stress, and constant threat, the psychological pressure took its toll on me. The incessant sound of warplanes caused ear pain, tinnitus, and dizziness. Despite these conditions, I still had to work with limited internet. I tried to maintain contact with journalists and experts abroad so that Iran's voice would not be silenced. During this period, hospitals were also under severe strain. Many specialist doctors had left the city. Even private hospitals faced doctor shortages. Many residents of areas near the oil depots in Shahran and Shahreh developed respiratory problems due to air pollution and smoke. After 40 days, when some specialist doctors finally returned to the hospitals, I was admitted to the hospital myself due to the physical problems caused by the psychological pressure and noise exposure. These 40 days were not just a military war. They were a psychological, social, and human war. A war whose effects still remain in the lives of Iranian women, children, and the people. And so we have a few photos here. I think folks have been following the news outlets and know very well the killing of the 170 plus children at the Manab school. Here to the bottom left, you'll see the grave sites being dug for those young children, those young girls. In the upper right is a residence, Iranian residence building, completely destroyed. And the photo in the bottom right is a picture of a hospital room. So places where people would ideally get treated have no place to go. And so we thought it was important to have voices from the ground share their firsthand experience, perhaps from more of an anecdotal and personal sharing, so that we can really get a sense for what going through war is like, particularly for Sahar. So that's for sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna, for sharing that story, the experience of Sahar, so beautifully. And it's just been very, very shocking, saddening, distressing, I think, for all of us, witnessing this very, unwarranted, illegal, and completely inhumane attack on a country. Sometimes words just really escape us, and just a great sadness is how we sort of feel. But anyway, we're very grateful to Sahar for sharing that story with us, and we hope that we can regain contact and offer support. So our next speaker is Nalin from the Kurdish Women's Movement, or GWUAN. And Nalin is based in Munich, and she is originally from Afrin in Rojava. She is a Kurdish activist and a member of the Kurdish Women's Office for Peace, GWUAN. As a woman in the diaspora, Nalin advocates for women's rights, peace, and the visibility of Kurdish voices. She also raises awareness about the situation in Kurdistan, including ongoing displacement and human rights violations. Hello, Nalin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Hello. Thank you for having me. We're talking about Rojava, the women's struggle, self-administration, and the current challenges. When we speak about Rojava, we are referring to the Kurdish region in northern Syria, also known as West Kurdistan. Kurdistan itself is divided across 4 states. Turkey, which we call Bakur because Bakur is in Kurdish north, so North Kurdistan. Then in Iran, Rojhelat, East Kurdistan, Iraq, Bashur, South Kurdistan, and Syria, West Kurdistan. That's why we call it Rojava. So Rojava means west in Kurdish. For decades, Kurdish people across all 4 regions have faced repression, including criminalization, forced assimilation, cultural erasure, and denial of their identity. In 2011, with the beginning of the Syrian civil war, a historic opportunity emerged. Kurdish communities in North Syria began to organize and establish a system of self-administration, also known today as the Democratic Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, in short form DANES. Around 4 to 5 million people currently live in this region, including Kurds, Arabs, Assyrians, Armenians, and other minorities. This project is often described as one of the most remarkable political experiments over time, also a very deeply feminist one. The system is built on 3 main pillars: democracy, ecology, and women's liberation. When we talk about democracy in Rojava, we mean grassroots democracy. This means that power comes from the bottom up. In practice, it looks like local communes in every neighborhood where people organize themselves and make decisions about their daily lives. Every community, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or gender, has the right to self-determination and freely express its identity. This is especially significant in a country like Syria, where many minorities were historically excluded from political representation under the government of Bashar al-Assad. A central aspect of the system is the liberation of women. Women in Rojava are not only included, they are at the center of the political and social transformation. One important structure is Congresta, a women-led umbrella organization where women organize politically and make decisions about their right and their role in society. Additionally, a co-leadership system has been implemented. Every political position is held by a man and by a woman. This ensures that women's voices are equally represented at all levels. Another development in this creation of the Women's Defense Units is the YPJ. This is an all-female military force that defends not only territory, but also women's rights, autonomy, and dignity. The YPJ gained global attention during the fight against the Islamic State, especially in 2014 in the Battle of Kobane. At its peak, thousands of women were a part of this force. For many, these women became a symbol of resistance, particularly in a region where patriarchal systems have historically dominated society. However, today, Rojava is once again facing serious threats. At the beginning of this year, the region was on the brink of losing its existence as military pressure increased and tension grew with the new transitional authorities in Syria led by Ahmed al-Shara. Ahmed al-Shara is a very controversial figure. He has a past connected to Islamic militias, groups, and was also fighting alongside Al-Qaeda. A couple years ago, there was a $10 million bounty placed on his head. And because of this, many people in the region do not trust his leadership. So far, the new political progress has not included the rights of ethnic and religious minorities in a meaningful way. women especially are being left out. Their rights are not clearly protected, and they are not equally represented in decision making. At the same time, Kurdish community were once again forced to flee their homes, and there have been disturbing reports of violence against women fighters. There have been cases where women fighters were not only killed but also publicly humiliated after their death by cutting their braids and posing with it on the internet. These acts are not random, they are symbolic, and they show that even in death, women's bodies are targeted, controlled, and violated. In response, many Kurdish women have begun braiding their hair as a symbol of resistance, freedom, and solidarity with the freedom fighter YPJ, the woman that has been cut her hair off. They were posing with her braid in the internet, and then all Kurdish women started to braid their hair as a sign of solidarity. Currently, negotiations are ongoing between the self-administration and the new transitional government in Damascus. But one of the biggest obstacles we're having is the future of YPJ. The Syrian authorities demand that the YPJ either dissolves or integrates into a self-controlled forces, which means to be a police officer, which also means to dissolve itself. For many people in Rojava, this is unacceptable, of course. The YPJ is not only a military unit, it represents the struggle, sacrifices, and achievement of women who fought for their rights and for their society. Dissolving it would not only be a political decision, it would be a step backward for women's freedom. Too often in history, women were told, first comes freedom, women's right can wait. But we believe in the opposite. Women must be at the front of the revolution, not after it. They must shape it and fight for their rights from the very beginning. We Kurds truly believe that first we have to free our women and then we free the Kurds. That is why process and negotiations remain difficult, because at the core of this conflict lies a fundamental question. Can a system built on a women's liberation survive within a state structure that does not fully recognize it? So when we talk about the future of Rojava, we're not just talking about territory or political control. We're talking about a system that has created space for women, for minorities, and for real grassroots democracy in the middle of war. And the question we have to ask is, what happens if that system is forced to disappear? Because of many people, especially women, Rojava is not just a political project. It is a lived reality of freedom, dignity, and self-determination. And that is when the struggle continues, not only to protect a region, but to defend the idea that a different, more equal society is possible. And this is why we are speaking up for Rojava, because many people don't know a lot about Kurdistan or Rojava or the autonomous self-administration. And if they heard of it, they don't know what a significant and spectacular project it is. And I would still say it is one of the most significant projects over time, especially in a system like in a region like Middle East, where the patriarchal system is taking control at its best. And in this war zone, this women liberation has grown, and that's why we have to protect it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Naleen, for that very informative sharing and presentation. I think a lot of what you have presented provides possibilities, right? I think the people and the women of Rojava are modeling what fighting for women's liberation could look like, particularly in your part of the world, even to the point of having to take up arms in self-defense. So we honor your bravery and your courage and continuation in taking up in your own hands the liberation of women, because too often, as you said, the issue of women's liberation, particularly in the Middle East, West Asia, has been used as an excuse for foreign intervention. And in this case, you have taken the liberation of women into your own hands. So thank you so much for that. So our last and final speaker to represent women of the grassroots is Maria Hernandez. She is coming to us from GWUAN with the Micronesia Climate Change Alliance. Maria was born and raised in GWUAN in the Mariana Islands. She's an indigenous Chamorro mother of 3. She's a filmmaker and community organizer with a background in journalism and communications, addressing issues at the intersection of indigenous rights, environmental justice, demilitarization, and community action. A lineal descendant of the Litkian and sacred ancestral village in northern GWUAN, Maria has spent over a decade organizing on the front lines of a resistance movement to protect land and water from the impacts of a massive US military buildup in the Marianas. Her advocacy has been especially focused on opposing the construction of a US Marine live fire training range complex over her ancestral lands. Maria is the co-executive director of Micronesia Climate Change Alliance and director of the Hita Litkian, and works alongside a multi-generational movement of Chamorro families who uphold indigenous stewardship as essential to the protection of GWUAN and the well-being of future generations. Please welcome Maria.
Manas and Hapade Santiro. Inanusi Maria Hernandez May. My name is Maria Hernandez. I am a daughter of GWUAN here, born and raised in the Mariana Islands. And I'm very grateful. I'm feeling very humbled to represent my home islands here in this webinar, and want to extend just very deep gratitude to all the organizations bringing everyone here together in solidarity for this sobering conversation about the impacts of war tensions in our homelands. So I serve as a co-executive director of grassroots organization Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, and our mission is to find community-centered solutions to the climate crisis that protect and heal our sacred islands, waters, and peoples. And I'm also a descendant of Ritidian or Latexan. Our family has been resisting a massive firing range being built over our land and above our island's main aquifer for over a decade now. And it's a 60-year land justice struggle for the return of our ancestral lands. I'm coming to you 4 days after our home islands were hit by a super typhoon. We're leading mutual aid efforts and drives to bring critical supplies to the most vulnerable communities across our islands. Living in a typhoon alley, we are in, the Marianas, we exist in a typhoon alley, and we just joined many communities in the Pacific on the front lines of the climate crisis who are experiencing stronger and more frequent typhoons that tear through our islands with devastating force. And we are currently entering recovery mode. So our people are in a state of trauma, battling after having battled sustained winds of 185 miles per hour over 4 days at the speed that rips roofs from homes, that leaves entire communities without power, without water, without access to basic needs for months. Communities are coming together for mutual aid drives and rapid response support as we work hard to rebuild. We have lived through this time and time again. We know what it means to stand in the aftermath of super typhoons, to wait in long lines for food, to wait in long lines for water, not having any water to shower or drink for extended periods. We know the feeling of trying to comfort our children in the dark as they endure the heat, toss and turn as mosquitoes bite relentlessly, and we listen to them speak and wonder when life will be normal again. And just as we begin to rebuild, another storm threatens. So the reality here is that in the Marianas, we are enduring this reality while war tensions escalate around us. Our islands have been in the midst of a massive military buildup since 2008, and voices on the ground have been ignored by the Department of War as they have moved forward against consistent community opposition and we're trying to be as loud as we can against these projects that harm our sacred lands and waters, and they continue to move forward. The same systems that should be supporting our recovery are instead expanding military infrastructure. Since 2008, 900 football fields of our land have been cleared for military buildup construction. Firing ranges are being built over sacred lands and burials. A 700-acre firing range is being built above our island's main water source, the Northern Guam Lands Aquifer, and resources that could strengthen our resilience, our power grids, our water systems, our local food systems are diverted elsewhere. War tensions drive up fuel prices, which makes recovery even harder. It's now up to $6 per gallon in Guam and almost $9 in the island of Tinian to the north. And water also strains supply chains, so it makes food even more scarce. In our home, more than 90% of our food is imported, and we are bound to the Jones Act, federal legislation that requires that any goods shipped between U.S. ports must be carried on ships that are built in the U.S., owned by U.S. companies, crewed primarily by U.S. workers. This means that Guam can't just import cheaply from the nearest island or country. We often have to go through U.S. approved shipping routes. War tensions deepen our dependence when what we need is sovereignty and real agency to make a decision, to make decisions about our future, and the right to free, prior, and informed consent about anything that impacts our cultural heritage, lands, and waters. So with all of these compounding harms, when the next typhoon comes, we are more vulnerable. For women, this burden is multiplied. We are the ones holding our children through the storms and after it. We are the ones leading mutual aid efforts with our children in our arms. In our matriarchal society in the Marianas, it is often the women who are finding ways to support our communities in times of disaster. We are the ones navigating trauma, our own and the trauma of generations before us, while still showing up every day to make our ancestors proud. We're trying our best to move with love here and healing to counter the violence that we are experiencing to our lands and waters, from colonization, hyper-militarization, and so many harmful systems of oppression that plague us here. But I'm not here today to only speak about the harms. I'm here to speak about the strength of our people, our resistance, the ways that we center joy and healing in our work. Our communities are not lying down. We are rising. Across our island, women are leading. Frontline efforts in the face of compounding systems of harm and oppression. In times of crisis, we become each other's safety net. And I'd like to bring up in our Chamorro culture, the Chamorro value of akudi, which is not just to help, but it's to catch one another. So we're returning to land and ocean-based practices. We're growing our own food, fishing and sharing within our families. We're reviving ancestral practices that have been harmed through colonizations. And we are working hard to create a different world and stronger circles of community care and solidarity. We established our first resiliency hub here in GWUAN to better organize and respond to climate change. Just last year, we brought together over 20 different groups across our entire archipelago to talk about building deeper bonds of solidarity. And we are teaching our children who they are. Generations after our grandparents were brutalized and tortured for speaking their language, our children are learning our language. The youth are learning to step into their power as the next generation of protectors. and we're speaking out against the further harms to our lands. We're advocating for investments in climate, resiliency, and just recovery, not war. We are a peaceful people, and we just want to protect our water, our sacred lands, our burials, and our sacred places. Living in a colony, you don't learn about being a colony in school. I learned in young adulthood that the same systems that drive war are the systems that drive climate destruction. And both are making it harder for our communities to live to our fullest potential in our homelands. So today, when I speak about gas prices, grocery prices, and rising costs, we're talking about trying our hardest as a people to love our home and exist in a system that was never designed for us to thrive. So we hold on to our values as a people, Inafa Malik, reciprocity. We hold on to our sacred responsibility to care for one another. We hold on to our ancestors who survived colonization, war, forced displacement off their lands. We remember their strength, and we look to a future where our islands are not defined by war, but by healing. And a future where we have a seat at the table, a real seat at the table to determine our future. The people of the Marianas, we are still here. We are still rising to create a future worthy of our children. Sidzus Masi, thank you for having me in today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was a wonderful presentation, and especially the fact that you can put this together after what you faced in the last week. It's a real testament to your strength and courage. And it's very important that we are here in solidarity with you and others. And of course, climate change is what we should be focusing on, and protecting the vulnerable countries rather than this terrible build-up of militarization, war, weapons, etc. So thank you so much, Maria, for that wonderful presentation. And just to remind everybody too that if you've got questions, please place them in the chat, or we're coming to the end of our time shortly. But first we have our next speaker, who is going to be speaking from the aspect of Parliament. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, the Honourable Matt Robson from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And Matt is a barrister, human rights barrister, and he has served as an MP in Aotearoa, New Zealand from 1996 to 2005, and he was New Zealand's Minister for Disarmament and Arms Control within the Labour Alliance coalition government in 1999, which was led by the first elected female Prime Minister, Helen Clark. Matt was mandated to promote New Zealand's opposition to nuclear weapons and membership of aggressive military blocs such as NATO, which is what he did, and he still speaks out very strongly. So welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us today.
First of all, I want to say ka tangi te tite, ka tangi te kāka, ka tangi hoki a ho, a te hei Māori ora. So all across the world, you are hearing the birds of New Zealand, and I hope they give you some comfort and inspiration. Just hearing the four speakers, I want to keep my comments short. My first thoughts are across the four speakers, just how strong they all were, and it reflects the backgrounds they come out of, and particularly those who either have been or are in areas of conflict. The words by Professor Chenoy of Rosa Luxemburg struck me, because if Rosa was alive, she would join very much in the four women who presented. She not only was an opponent of war, she was a leading feminist throughout the world, an internationalist, and she would have agreed with, I've written a number of notes, there was such a lot that came out, of Nalin's statement about the fact that the women's movement in Kurdistan is not something to the side, it's at the forefront. I'm paraphrasing. She put it more eloquently than that. And Rosa Luxemburg certainly was an international feminist speaker who talked about the causes in the First World War and talked about the oppression both of workers throughout the world, farmers throughout the world, women, and united all those struggles and showed that they were all part of a work against oppression. And of course, Nalin is talking from Berlin, where Rosa Luxemburg was murdered for what she stood for, along with Karl Liebknecht, her comrade, who in the parliament had opposed the First World War. Well, I think there were two Social Democrats, the equivalent in New Zealand, we call it the Labour Party, but a Social Democratic Party, and they stood out against the war. But Rosa was the leading voice in this, and it's still an inspiration across the centuries. The words of Maria on the Pacific are very close to us here in New Zealand, and I can just point out that as a country, we're often seen as far away from other countries. But of course, it always depends where you are. We're very close to the Marianas. We're very close to countries near us. Everybody is close to where they live, but we're connected by a common struggle. And that's the key lesson for parliamentarians and the movements that hopefully they come out of and reflect and work with. It's not that parliamentarians have a role separate from the people they represent, or they should not. They have to remember, or I hope they remember, that they are there as a public servant. They are there for the people who elected them and to work with them in and outside of the parliament. In New Zealand, we're seen as we are a part of the privileged world. And because we've been, like Israel, we were set up as a colonial settler state. And it's been the question of getting facts through to our public, but getting to our people to show that the most important weapon that we have is knowing the truth. And when I was looking at what I was asked to do today, my first thoughts turned to George Orwell, the English novelist and writer, who pointed out that those in power say things which mean the opposite. So peace actually means war. War means peace. And that's shown exactly by the role of the United States. The country that Martin Luther King said in 1967 in his famous speech at the Riverside Church against the war, against the people of Vietnam, that my country is the greatest purveyor of violence. It does not mean that others are exculpated. The allies of that violence are also guilty in each of our own countries across the world. Members of parliament, particularly, if they're in a country where the parliament is open to election and that they are representing their people, have a duty to use their privilege, as Karl Liebknecht did, the compadre of Rosa Luxemburg, to speak out against oppression, against injustice. So lastly, just to use as an illustration, and by the way, all of the speakers, there was so much in what you said, and it was inspirational in the work that you're doing, whether it's in the academic sphere or as a reporter, as our companion from Iran reported, or in the political struggles of Nalin and Maria. All of those connected us to central issues. I just want to speak, though, on the war on Iran. And lastly, on the Pacific. In New Zealand, we became nuclear free because not governments wanted to be nuclear free, but because the people started to rise up and said, we don't want to be part of nuclear weapons and nuclear war. They were inspired by the type of struggles that Maria has pointed out, and by the indigenous people in New Zealand who were connected to their cousins, to their family throughout the whole Pacific. It brought in the whole question of colonialism, because in New Zealand, as a settler colonial state, we were always given the false words of our traditional friends and allies. Well, our traditional allies were the imperialist countries and colonial countries who occupied the Pacific nations, independent nations, our own country with a settler government amongst them. We took Samoa, we took Niue, we took other Pacific islands as part of the chain of oppression. And now, far away as we are from the centers of conflict in the Middle East, and by the way, we've always sent our soldiers, not personally, but our soldiers to these conflicts. And the Middle East is actually, well, what we call the Middle East, West Asia, was well known to New Zealand because their soldiers were sent on behalf of the British Empire to protect its oil interests and other imperialist interests. And if you travel from France up to Belgium, you'll find thousands of young New Zealanders, 18, 19, 21, who were sent there in the First World War and lie under the soil of Europe. So our country has been part of the whole imperialist network. And in the Pacific, the role that we have is with the organization called the Five Eyes, which is led by the United States. New Zealand's actually called the Blink because sometimes it doesn't participate in all of the activities. But the Five Eyes is to spy on people's movements throughout the Pacific and Southeast Asia, which the New Zealand intelligence services can reach and their spying apparatus. And now we're part of the Asia Pacific NATO, called the Asian Pacific cooperating partners, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. NATO, the so-called defensive organization, which is others have outlined, particularly Professor Chenoi, its imperialist role and what it has done and what it has destruction it has visited upon the world. Now, New Zealand and Australia and Japan and South Korea in particular, and the Philippines is involved as well, are part of the process of containing China and Russia. I just want to finish by one last thing, and then my reaction role is what has been said stresses internationalism, the interconnectedness of struggle, and the need to get facts out to our people so that they can oppose the oppression that continues around the world and the sense and the source of that oppression, which, using the old frame, all roads lead to Rome, well, all roads lead to Washington. And that's where the center is of the organized conspiracy against the people of the world. NATO, I said on a television program, we call it the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization. I was attacked for that by a journalist who called me and said, there is a New Zealand soldiers have died in the Ukraine, and don't you think that you should apologize? I said, no. When I think of that poor soldier who went to the Ukraine thinking that he was going to take part in a great war of liberation, I thought of Rudyard Kipling, who wrote a poem about his son in 1915, who went to the war, which Kipling supported as the great imperialist poet. His son was killed. It changed his worldview. And he wrote this poem where he said, and if they question why we died, tell them because our leaders lied. And I said to her, well, our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she lied to this poor young man. She allowed him to be killed. And that's the last thing I just want to say. The responsibility, particularly of those of us in Parliament who take some role in shaping our country's role in the world, is to get out the facts, get out the truth, and give that as a very, very powerful weapon to all of the oppressed in our own country and across the world. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. I think your ability to really combine the sharings of our speakers and so eloquently express the role that parliamentarians should have in really speaking the truth that's on the side of the people, stressing internationalism. And I just want to thank you for also standing by the people in your service as your time as minister in New Zealand. So thank you so much for that. Very uplifting reaction to our presentations today. I'd like to also welcome our last and final speaker. It's very much an honor for me to do so. Sarah Elago, who is an activist and politician who served as the representative for Gabriela Women's Party since 2025. Gabriela Women's Party represents the interests and issues of Filipino women in the country. She's also a longtime member of Makabayan, which is a national democratic political party in the Philippines. She previously served as the representative for the Kabataan Party List, a political party that served the interests of youth from 2016 to 2022, during which she was the youngest female member of the House of Representatives. So please welcome Sarah.
Thank you, Donna, for that introduction. We heard powerful and necessary call to action that resonate from the keynote speech of Dr. Anu and the testimonies of grassroots women from Sahar, Naline, and Maria. Their voices forged in the daily struggles against wars and multiple forms of repression and oppression really provide a solid blueprint for a world that is truly rooted in genuine peace and justice. And this vision stands in direct opposition to the imperialist order that manufactures crisis, fuels militarization, and wages wars of plunder. And the resistance of nations and peoples, as shared by our speakers, demonstrates that imperialist aggression, however still powerful, can be resisted, and its outcomes are no longer guaranteed. And this shifting balance of forces is a testament to global people's struggles. In the Philippine context, this struggle is immediate. We see grassroots women at the forefront opposing the encroachment of what we call de facto foreign military bases through lopsided agreements, such as the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. They are resisting destructive mining that devastate communities. They are leading the fight for land. They are leading the fight for just and living wages. They are leading the fight for accessible social services. They are leading the fight against corruption. And this movement is intrinsically linked to the movement for peace. The fight against the regime after regime after regime's subservience to foreign dictates. And as have shared by our speakers, yes, the US-Israel war on Iran may be far away, but it affects the lives of so many in the global economy. In the Philippines, we feel its dire consequences in the thousands of lost jobs for our millions of overseas Filipino workers. We feel this in the soaring fuel prices, with the rising cost of transport, electricity, and food, and the deeper economic hardship for the ordinary folk. And this further exacerbates hunger and poverty affecting millions of families. So in response to this, our women's representation, Gabriela Women's Party in Congress, we have joined the broad Filipino people's call to stop US-Israel war on Iran campaign. And we have led the filing of a House resolution in the House of Representatives. This is currently signed by at least 50 members of Congress, 50 out of the 318 members of the House of Representatives. And we hope to garner more support to strengthen the call for the immediate cessation of hostilities, the pursuit of peaceful dialogue, the protection of civilians, amid the escalating military aggression in Iran, and expressing concern over the global economic impacts of war, including the escalating oil prices. And just today, we have also issued a statement in opposition to the plan to pull the Philippines into the US-led Pax Silica initiative and rebrand parts of our country as an economic security zone and industrial hub meant to surge production for inputs vital to US supply chains. We fear and we are gravely alarmed that this direction will further subordinate the Philippines to US strategic priorities and further expose our people, our economy, and our environment to heightened risk. We stress that this is fundamentally about war production, not really about what they say as neutral industrial development. Pax Silica is the production aspect, while the US-Philippines Critical Minerals Framework, which was just signed in February this year, a memorandum of understanding strengthening critical mineral supply chains, focusing on mining, processing, and refining select minerals to reduce reliance on China. So this initiative will be developed in a 4,000-acre economic security zone in Luzon in the Philippines. So this may be the foundation. And with this framework, as well as the recent membership in the Pax Silica initiative, together this lock in a pipeline from extraction to processing of strategic minerals to semiconductor and electronics output. So the reality of the potential end use of all of these cannot be ignored, with chips and advanced electronics being critical inputs, not only for consumer products, but also for missiles, drones, surveillance systems, targeting and communications infrastructure, and other war materials. So by hosting this hub that is explicitly designed to support US supply chains, the Philippines is being positioned to provide the technology requirements of the US war machine and to serve the evolving needs of a militarized bloc. And this plan also heightens the geopolitical danger. It entrenches the country more deeply in great power rivalry and increases the risk of economic coercion, trade retaliation, and broader instability. And so we in Congress, we call for full transparency and congressional scrutiny over all these commitments under Pax Silica and other related critical minerals arrangements. And the public must know and must demand information, whether these facilities are being set up as dual-use platforms that can be repurposed for war logistics and militarized supply repositioning. So we continue. These are just some of our initiatives in Congress that is being supported and campaigned for within alongside various sectors of society, with women not just at the fore, but women working within alongside multiple sectors affected by this crisis. We also extend our solidarity to all fighting economic hardship, climate emergency, state violence. We see how our struggles really are interconnected. The women's movement for peace will and must persist, firmly linking the demand to end wars overseas with the struggle to end militarization and injustice at home. True peace will only be achieved by actively building a society based on respect for sovereignty, social justice, and the people's rights. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that amazing and impassioned and very strong description of what you are doing and for your stand and your work. It's absolutely wonderful what you're doing, and very good luck with that. So that is our final speaker, and I'd like to offer a big thank you to everybody for these amazing, informative presentations, sharings, and analyses. We've all learned so much from each of you, and we hope that this knowledge can continue to inform how we work together, how we build solidarity, and how we develop genuine solutions. So now we have time, a little bit of time, for the participants of the webinar to ask some questions. And we've had one question that we've come up with that's been for the presenters, which is, what do you think that we can do to address the root issue of war and conflict? What are some solutions to achieving peace?
Well, for starters, I hope that we can maximize interparliamentary diplomacy, demanding our members of parliaments or congresses to speak out against the US-Israel war on Iran, as well as ensuring that there really is accountability in terms of violations of international laws. And, that is something that is something that cannot be done by the members of parliaments alone, but the members of parliament should work continue to work with it alongside other people to ensure that their voices are really, challenging the status quo instead of reinforcing it, as we have seen in our own spaces of parliamentary in the Philippines.
Thank you, Sarah. So what about Anu, would you like to talk about how we can address the root issue of war and conflict, some solutions?
Yeah, I think we have all to do what we can, like Sarah said about parliamentarians. I would say about academics who need to speak out, to analyze, to connect the dots, because there's so much information and so much false narratives, false consciousness. So we need to address those issues. Writing is resistance. Wherever we are, whether when we are climate activists, we link it to militarization, as Maria did. Nalin, the Rojava experiment, we need to talk about it, have these conversations, and what GWUAN and all the organizations that have supported us are doing. And I think we have this opportunity right now. The system of colonialism is cracking, and we need to widen this and assert our arguments on common security, on human development, that the alternative world is possible. Thank you.
So much, Anu. So let's go to you, Nalin, please.
So I would say that all women from all over the world have to represent all women from all over the world. Even we look different and we're from different countries, and especially for our sisters in countries where they don't have a nation. For example, Kurdistan is not a nation. Palestinians are colonized. Tamilian women, Sahrawi women. Those are all women without a national state, and it's very hard that these women are represented. And we have to be their voices as well, because when we talk about women, we have to talk about women from all over the world, because we are having the same issues, even we are from different parts of the world. So when we talk about women, we should talk about women worldwide.
I do believe that there is so much power in the grassroots to galvanize peace in our homelands, and whether that looks like building communities of care. One thing that we have been trying to do more is build resiliency in our communities so that we are creating that new system and that new world that we want our children to live in. And so just solidarity, building solidarity across our networks is key to bringing peace into this new world. And also, something that I've been doing more recently is working cross-territorially. So working with leaders from across the US territories who are experiencing so many similar struggles around colonization, and just having those conversations and seeing all that we have in common. And that's the first step, really, is in affecting change, is to build that solidarity network. So I hope that after this webinar, we can continue to stay in conversation and work together and find ways to stay connected, and because we're going through a lot of the same struggles in our homes.
Thank you, Maria. And over to you, Matt, please.
Well, I think the common theme is clearly internationalism. And I think of the role of women in history. If you think of the Russian Revolution of 1917, it was women coming out on the street for bread, peace, and land. I mean, Lenin picked up the slogan, but it came from the women's movement first in Russia. In Argentina, it was women who led the struggle against the junta, the disappearance of their sons, mothers for the disappearance of their sons. In Guatemala, you have some very heroic women who've led, and their courage has spread around the world. But really, it's the inspiration. The people who are the victims show the way. The Palestinians obviously have had the most appalling oppression since 1948 and the imposition of the exile and the Nakba. but they continue to exist, and they've pointed out, hey, I think the slogan is resistance is existence, something like that. Across the world, that inspiration and that internationalism. I first remember my first politics was my father. I was born in Australia, was a waterside worker, or I think the Americans call it longshoremen. And I wasn't alive, but he told me they refused to load ships for the Dutch to continue their colonization of Indonesia. The war in Vietnam was my first time in politics, and there you had leading women in the struggle of the people of Vietnam. But when Martin Luther King made his speech in America, he was reacting to the fact that he'd been silent. He said, "You can't be silent." He was told that as a civil rights leader, don't mix it up with this. And he pointed out in that, I'm sure everybody's read it. I've just read it many, many times. It's so inspirational. You cannot remain silent if you're going to fight oppression. You have to speak out. And he connected the war in Vietnam to the oppression inside the United States and the role of the United States around the world. And in doing so, he refused to accept the position of being made into a saint, an icon that he could talk about, but don't talk about the reality of what he's talking about. The oppression of people in America, of Black people, is the oppression around the world, and we join up. Those are easy for me to say, and I sometimes feel a bit embarrassed but it's internationalism at the core of our work, whichever field that we're involved in, whichever sphere of whichever country we're in. One thing about New Zealand is that it's prostituted. I use the word prostituted as in a democratic country. So the United States, the NATO countries, they beg us to be part of the coalition of the willing. Why? Because yes, New Zealand has a democratic political structure. It's seen as a country of peace. And therefore, unfortunately, we have allowed ourselves to be used for these imperialist countries to say, New Zealand is there. It must be okay. That's something we can stop. The people, I just go back to the question of the truth. Palestine and New Zealand used to be accepted that the terrorists were the Palestinians. And now, after such a long struggle of all the people internationally and in New Zealand, majority of people now see the government in Tel Aviv as the terrorists. In the war in Vietnam, we were told that the Vietnamese were the aggressors. When I was growing up, you can imagine it, that this happens. So I'm just using those two examples from myself and my own country to show that the truth. I don't know who ever said it. Many famous people have said it. I think Che Guevara said it. The truth is revolutionary. It's true.
Thank you so much, May.
Okay, thank you so much again, everyone, for all of your responses. That about wraps up our program, but I did want to just thank you all again for being here. Thank you to all of our presenters and speakers, especially to our esteemed guests, our parliamentarians. And thank you again to all of you who have been so patient as we navigated some of our technical difficulties. But as we do in our women's movement and in engaging in our political work, we always persevere, as the people will continue to do in the face of struggle and hardship. So with that, I'd like to end with our final calls to action. Please do save the date. This was part 1 of a 2-part series. Part 2 will continue on May 23rd, and this series will focus on Europe, Africa, and the Americas. It will have a similar sort of design where we'll have representatives coming from the grassroots and also parliamentarians from the represented regions as reactors. So there are the time zones listed there on the slide. And then we are sort of gearing up to confront NATO once again, who will be hosting their next summit on July 7 to 8 in Ankara, Turkey. And GWUAN has historically persisted in organizing anti-NATO protest activities. If you want to know more about that, please get in touch with either GWUAN or IWA There will be activities being planned, as I understand it, in Ankara this summer. So if you're not already involved in any of the organizations that were shared today, you can also get in touch with GWUAN and IWA to find out more about how to be involved or to participate in any of our activities, webinars, campaigns. Please visit our website to get more information. But thank you all once again. Let's continue the conversation. Let's continue to build solidarity, build that internationalism, and continue to confront this crisis so we can end these wars once and for all. Thank you so much.